Hey everyone, it's Jananie and welcome back to another episode of #EpicBookRecs. So this is a monthly series that I do here on the Epic Reads channel where I recommend a bunch of books based on a certain theme. So I've done a ton of fun and exciting themes before, so go check out the playlist down below so you can see all the books that I've already recommended. But today's theme is one that I've actually already done before, but I thought I would do it again because there's just so many more books that I can recommend for this theme, and it's not really a theme, it's more of a genre, and that is fantasy. So I have recommended a bunch of my favorite fantasies before, so you can go check that out in the playlist. But for today's video, I'm recommending 6 new YA fantasies. One of them is a graphic novel. One of them I've actually recommended before in a different themed video, so I'm just overall excited for them all. I'd also like to say that fantasy is like one of my favorite genres, and it was one of my favorite things growing up, so I'm so excited to be kind of recommending a bunch of my faves today. So a recent fantasy fave of mine is A Song of Wraiths and Ruin by Roseanne A. Brown. This was a book that kind of took me by surprise and just didn't let go. It follows 2 very amazing and badass main characters. The first is Malik, who is kind of fleeing his war-stricken home with his sisters, and he's fleeing towards a city where there's this festival happening called the Solstasia. But on the way to the desert city of Zoran, his sister Nadia gets kidnapped by a vengeful spirit who's trying to use Malik to achieve its bitter ends. And so in order to save his sister, Malik must kill the princess of Zoran. And of course, that princess happens to be our other main character, Karina, who's a crown princess, and her mother has just recently been assassinated, and she's faced with having to rule her country and kind of continue on. But Karina will not take her mother's death silently. She's determined to bring her back to life. And so she finds this kind of sinister way of resurrecting her mother, which requires the heart of a king. And so during the Solstasia festival, there is a competition that always runs, and so Karina makes the prize of that competition her hand in marriage. And so Malik enters this competition to get close to her so that he can kill her, but Karina is allowing these, competitors to compete to win in order to, marry her. And so once they marry her, they will be a king and she can steal their heart to bring her mother back. And it's this wild and crazy situation where the 2 of them are after each other's throats, but there's a little bit of a love story that comes into play. This was such a wonderful and beautifully told book. The very first chapter starts with someone telling a story, and it's just so wonderfully done. And I loved both of the main characters. Karina is a very cutthroat character, but she's just trying her best. And Malik is such a soft and muffiny boy who just wants the best for his family, and he is trying his best as well. So I absolutely love both of these characters and the fantasy world that they inhabit, which is inspired by West African folklore. And overall, I think it's just a great fantasy that you should definitely pick up. All right, the next book is one that I recently picked up and have been anticipating for the longest time because the cover is just so gorgeous, and that is Star Daughter by Shweta Thakrar. So this is a fantasy inspired by Hindu mythology, but also involves a kind of celestial magic. And so it follows our main character Sheetal, who is the daughter of a human man and a star. So the story is kind of similar to Stardust by Neil Gaiman. If you've ever read the book or watched the movie, it's similar to that. And the book is very magical and kind of out of this world. And so Sheetal has always grown up knowing that she's half a star, and her mother used to live with her on Earth, but she returned to the heavens. So she hasn't seen her mother in years. But when Sheetal starts to hear the Song of the Stars a lot louder, this is something that she's always heard throughout her life, but it's kind of a calling, and it gets stronger and stronger at the beginning of the book. And her hair that is, naturally white, she's been covering it up with black dye, it starts to show despite the dye. The dye no longer works, and her identity is about to get revealed. And amidst all of that, she ends up accidentally hurting her father with her star power and puts him in the hospital. And so in order to find a way to save him, she travels to the heavens to meet her mother and ends up getting embroiled in a competition for the different houses of the celestial court and for who is going to rule next. This is definitely for fans of Stardust. If you like fantasy that is slightly grounded in our real world, this one starts out in our real world. Sheetal's trying to see her boyfriend at the beginning, she's having her regular school life, but it kind of gets uprooted by her secret identity, and it's just a lot of fun. So definitely recommend if you're looking for a whimsical, magical read. A great one to pick up. Alright, the next book that I want to recommend is Bone Crier's Moon by Catherine Purdy. This one is so interesting in the way that the fantasy world is crafted. This one is more of a high fantasy. It's not set in our real world. And in this world, there are people called Bone Criers. So they are these women who are kind of trained from birth to become kind of these reapers, these people who ferry the souls of the dead into hell or heaven, or the versions of hell and heaven in this world. But the catch is that before they kind of take on this sacred duty, they have to give up their most prized possession, which is their one true love. And so these bone criers, on like the night of their ascension, kind of, they go onto a bridge and they meet their destined love, but they must kill them or choose to live with them for a year and produce an heir and then kill them. And so this book follows 3 different main characters. The first is Aless, who is a bone crier. She is always been very excited about her duty, and she's always assumed that she will very easily kill her destined love. She is also just a star amongst her peers. She is the daughter of the current head of the bone criers, and she's just very powerful. The bone criers have this magic where if they slay a animal or a beast of some kind, they can take a bone and carve it into a part of a necklace, and it gives them superior powers, gives them the powers of those animals. So superior sight or hearing. So Les is kind of like a star. She's like the best of the bone criers, but she is always trying to live up to her mother's expectations. And then we have another bone crier as another perspective character, and that is Sabine, who has never really wanted to be a bone crier. She kind of just wants a regular life. Her best friend is Aless, and they have been like thick as thieves since they were children. And although, you know, Sabine wants to live up to her duty, she doesn't think she's capable of it. She hates killing things. She doesn't think she has like the mettle in her to do that. And she's always been satisfied with kind of staying in the sidelines. And then our last main character, or point of view character, is Bastian, who is this young man who saw his father kind of go onto a bridge one night and meet a bone crier, and saw his father get killed by that bone crier. And so Bastian has always harbored this very strong hate towards bone criers, and he's determined to get revenge. So he, along with 2 of his friends who also lost their father to a bone crier, end up trying to hunt these bone criers, and they end up getting pretty close to Aless and Sabine, and things kind of escalate when these 3 characters meet. But I just really liked the kind of setup of this book and the way that the world is kind of constructed, and also just the very uniqueness of these bone criers. It's a very unique type of fantasy role, which I thought was just super cool, and I've never kind of seen it in a different book. So highly recommend if you were looking for something a little bit deadly, a little bit vengeful, and with multiple point of view characters. Alright, the next book is a personal favorite of mine that I recently picked up and I'm just enjoying so much, and that is Hunted by the Sky by Tanez Bethena. And this is a high fantasy inspired by medieval India. This follows our 2 main characters, Gul and Kavas. So Gul is our main female character here, and she has grown up her entire life with this star-shaped birthmark on her arm. And although it seems insignificant, there is this prophecy in the world that she lives in where the king of her country will be killed and taken down by a woman with this birthmark. And so girls who have this birthmark or a similar birthmark have been hunted around the country and have been killed for having this birthmark. And so Gul and her family have always kind of tried to hide this away. And in the very first chapter, when Gul is really young, her parents are murdered while the soldiers are trying to find Gul. And so from that inciting incident, Gul ends up running into this band of women called the Sisters of the Golden Lotus. And these are a band of young women who are kind of rebels and kind of warriors, and most of them kind of wield some sort of magic as well. And magic is a pretty common thing in this world, and they also kind of consist of a class that is higher than the non-magic folk, which comes into play when you meet our main male character, who is Kavas, who is this lowly palace servant, and he is a non-magic person, and so he has had to face a lot of the classism because of that. And prior to the book starting, there was this girl that he cared for who was also killed for having the same kind of birthmark as Gul. And so these 2 characters are kind of in these very different situations and end up meeting because Gul wants her revenge for her parents. I don't want to spoil too much with this, so I'll leave it at that, but this is just a great book, and I love the way that Gul's journey starts off. You get a kind of wide scope of her life because it starts so early, but I also just really love the dynamic between the 2 main characters. They start off in kind of an enemies to lovers type way, which I really, really enjoyed. Alright, the next book that I want to recommend today is a very old favorite of mine. It's an older YA book that came out quite a few years ago, and that is Graceling by Kristen Cashore. So this is another kind of high fantasy type book, and in this world there are these things called Gracelings. So Gracelings are people who have graces, which are these very specific magical abilities that they have. So a grace can range from like combat to giving people dreams, to basically kind of any magical enhancement that you can think of. So our main character, Katza, is this young woman who finds out at age 8 that she has the grace to kill. So she becomes the king's thug and, you know, basically an assassin, and goes around killing a lot of people. But when a prince from a neighboring kingdom named Prince Po, who has a grace for combat, ends up visiting, her world kind of gets shaken up, and Katza starts to realize that the things that she believed about herself might not necessarily be true. And this is both a romance but also kind of a journey story. It stays in one place for like half the book, and then they start to journey for the other half, and there is a like villain in this story that is just kind of mind-blowing, and you see him crop up in the companion novels for this series as well, which I thought was just super cool. But overall, I just love the concept of this world and the idea of the graces. Much like Bone Criers, they are just so specific and really kind of cool, and I loved just hearing about the different graces, but also seeing how what you think your grace is might not actually be what your grace is. So yes, highly recommend if you're looking for a fantasy romance, if you're looking for a fantasy with very specific magical powers. All right, and the last book that I want to recommend today is a graphic novel, and that is Witchy by Ariel Salma-Riaz. So this is one that I picked up very recently and absolutely loved. I've recently gotten back into graphic novels, which has been really exciting, and this is a fantasy graphic novel, and just seeing the magic on the pages was just so exciting. Witchy is set in this witch kingdom called Highland, and in this kingdom your magical strength is determined by the length of your hair. So the longer your hair, the stronger your magic is. And from the very beginning we get this story from our main character Jananie, whose father was burned for having hair that was too long. So in the kingdom, although your hair determines how strong your magic is, if your hair is too long, if your magic is too strong, then the witch burners will come for you and burn you for being too strong. And so our main character Jananie has always grown up knowing this fact about her kingdom. It's always been a prestigious thing to be accepted into the witch's guard, having long hair and having the strong magic, but if you're too strong, then you will be killed. And so when she is in school and they're about to test for the witch's guard, she starts to get anxious. You know, Jananie has been charming her hair to look shorter to her peers, to her principal, to make everyone believe that she's not as strong as she is. But even though she has strong magic, she's not really able to control it, which just feeds into this myth that she's feeding other people that, you know, her hair is short, that her magic isn't strong. And so there's this growing anxiety as these examinations come closer, and, you know, Jananie doesn't want to get caught, and she doesn't want what happened to her father to happen to her. But overall, I just really loved the concept of Witchy and the way that the length of your hair determines your magic. Like, I just thought it was just the coolest concept, and the whole world that this book exists in is just super cool, and the artwork is just amazing. So I thought I would show you a little bit of it today. So this is just a spread from the beginning of the book. It's super cool. I love the light and the colors and just the way that the characters are drawn, and also just the way that emotion appears on the characters' faces. So overall, really recommend. This is a fun, short read, but it's a fantasy read, which is just really nice. And I do think that this is the type of book where you fall in love with every single one of the characters. There are a few of Nineve's like bullies that you meet at the beginning who are slowly endeared towards you, and you realize that there's a lot more to them, and that was just really great. All right, but those are all the books that I wanted to recommend today. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I love recommending fantasy books, and I picked up a bunch more recently for this video, which was really nice, and I just really enjoyed kind of getting back into the genre. But I would love for you guys to leave me your fantasy recs down below. Obviously this is one video, so I can't include like all of my favorite fantasy books, so there are a lot that I had to leave out. But I would love to hear from you guys what your favorite fantasy books are, the ones that you just can't stop talking about. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I'm Jananie from the channel This Story Ain't Over, and I'll see you in the next episode of #EpicBookRecs. Bye!